All right, what's up, everybody? Welcome to the Q&A call here with 18 Strong, and this is a special episode because we've got our buddy Chris Finn from Par4Success, and Chris is going to be here talking about everything related to speed. First of all, Chris, just welcome in. It's great to have you here.
Yeah, excited to be here, and excited for the new format for sure as well. So excited to get into it.
Yeah, this is cool. So I've got tons of questions here that I've got laid out, but I know that we've got some questions that came in from the crew via email. We'll have some people live here. So anybody that's on the call here, just throw your questions in the chat if you have one for Chris. But a little background on Chris: physical therapist, and is the founder of Par4Success, and really has become a pioneer in not just the strength and conditioning side of working with a lot of very high level golfers, but as far as researching the tried and true techniques of strength and conditioning, speed training, and really that's what we're going to talk about today, is everything about speed. And Chris, I'm really excited. I got a chance to read through a lot of the research stuff that you guys sent over, that you guys have done, and we'll make sure to link this stuff up in the show notes, because the one like summary page that you guys did was phenomenal, and just kind of broke down a lot of the different questions that really I'm going to cherry pick and throw at you today. But,
yeah, sweet.
But first of all, just if you don't mind, give people just a little idea of what really got you interested in doing the research piece of this. And really, I mean, I think you're one of the main people when it comes to doing this right now.
Yeah, I think honestly, the big thing for me was when I got into this probably 10 years ago, or whatever, is I just thought the idea of golf fitness was kind of stupid, to be frank. I was like, there's no way that works. I guess I have this inner, like, I don't believe it till, like, let me see it. And so, yeah, I did my first certification and came back and really wasn't, I would say, satisfied with kind of the explanation of how they got the numbers and kind of the quote unquote research that was being put out at that point. And so I just started, I guess, first of all, was just like to make sure that I could actually get results, and like starting to record, all right, let's see where we're starting. We're going to go through all these tests, and then let's see, a little bit later, did they actually get better? And so that's kind of, honestly, it just started out of a place of, I don't think this is going to work. And from there, that kind of just natural kind of sense of, I don't believe it, then led to, oh my gosh, this is actually really important to show people that they got better. So not only was it for kind of the golfers I was working with, but it also became, for me and for, ultimately for Par4Success now, it's one of our greatest learning tools, is being able to look at something, try a program, or try an intervention, and then see, like, okay, did it work or did it not? And then, so I think that same kind of skepticism that I started with really has led to really all of the research that we've done. Is a huge part of our culture. Kind of, we joke, the blood that kind of flows through our veins at Par4Success really is that of question, curiosity. Does it really work? Like, there's just so much stuff on social media, and oh, do this or do that, or if we're talking speed, like all the different speed companies and the devices that come out, right? And it's just always, the deeper we've gotten into the industry, and it amazes me the number of people who come out with these big products, and they like tout all these, like, all this research, and it's multiple. It's not one, or it's rampant in the industry. Oh, we have research, and then you get on the phone with them now, because we're known for doing a lot of research, and they're like, hey, would you be willing to test the product? And it's like, oh, cool. Well, what testing have you done on your own? It's like, well, we got 10 case studies. Like, well, that's not research.
Wow, 10 whole case studies.
And so that's where it really begins, like, well, just so like, if we do this, like, we're going to report what we find, like, so are you okay with that? And so that's been really interesting, that a lot of the stuff where we test, people are like, they don't actually do their own homework, and then if we find something they don't like, then so be it. But so I think it's really just come from a place of skepticism, and ultimately our goal at Par4Success is to give golfers a clear path to hitting the ball further, playing longer, and doing it without pain. And by doing the research, not only does it help the consumers, but one of the other things I do working with TPI and helping a lot of the golf fitness guys build their businesses is it also helps the industry, because we can share that knowledge with other training professionals and medical professionals, so that the programs across the board, just our profession, can get better. So that's kind of what it's evolved to. But very simply put, it's come out of me just being very skeptical and thinking it wouldn't work. But lo and behold, 10 years, it does work, and I have a job. So
Yeah, I mean, Ryan and I, we've joked for a long time that the term golf fitness is kind of it's an interesting term because it explains or kind of describes, the idea of what the premise is behind it. But you don't hear people saying like hockey fitness and soccer fit. Well, now people are probably starting to do that just because, again, like you said, Instagram wise and online ways to market new things that really are kind of tried and true principles. But what I've really enjoyed, learning as much as we have just with all the different experts we've had on the show. And then also just through a lot of the stuff that, seeing you guys do is taking some of the tried and true principles that have been in sport for a long time, the strength and conditioning stuff, and now learning how to apply some of the specific things to golfers and how those crossovers come about. And then really, when we have people like you looking at, okay, here's somebody that says that this is going to create crossover, but does it really? And some of those things do. So obviously everybody that's here wants to talk about the speed portion of golf and the research that you guys have done on speed, just to kind of get the conversation started, because I know that we can go in so many different directions here and some people will be chiming in with some different questions for us. What would you say are a couple of the biggest things that really opened your eyes just as you started studying this thing, maybe misconceptions that you had coming in of things that were going to work or things that maybe weren't going to work that kind of had the opposite effect?
Yeah. So I think, let's see, what's the biggest one? Honestly, I would say the biggest one for us most recently was probably looking at medicine ball training. I think there's just such a big emphasis on rotational training, right? If you rotate, it's golf, right? And so, that was one thing we looked at was, through a lot of the research, we've really seen that, increasing the ability for the lower body to create vertical power and the upper body to create pushing power. Those are the two things that statistically speaking have a causational relationship to driving club head speed changes. What was some of the earlier research we did, we were looking at like a shot put throw, and we looked at anti-rotational strength, like all this stuff around rotation. And there was a correlation, meaning club head that got better and club head speed went up, and they seemed to kind of work together. But as we got deeper into the actual statistics of it, we realized it didn't actually work unless one of the other two also went up, right? So it was a correlation, not a causationally. So then we guys started scratching our heads and we're like, well, shoot, if that didn't work, well, then what about all the other rotational stuff, right? So we started, I started reading all the different research journals on med ball studies. A lot of it was like in youth baseball players, and they noticed if they did it, they swung faster. Again, it was correlation conclusions that were drawn. So we actually did, and the cool thing about our setup is we have 100 members that are all golfers. We affectionately call them our golf lab rats, right? And so whenever we have an idea, we control 100% of their programming. So we broke them up into a control group. One group did only medicine ball tosses. Another group didn't do any rotation. They just trained vertical and upper body push power. And then we looked across the board and we said, all right, well, at the end of 6 weeks, let's see who. I think that was a 6 or 8 week study. I forget how long that was. And basically at the end, we saw like the group that did the med ball training really saw no significant gain. But if you looked at the group that just trained vertical lower body and upper body push, they did great. So I think that was one of the cool ones for us, was like, okay, well, if we're trying to get faster, med balls are definitely not the way to go. Now, I think there definitely there's value in terms of, we call it transfer training, and we do a lot of research on ground reaction forces with our force plates, and there's definitely application there. But in terms of like, will med balls, throwing a medicine ball with the idea that it's going to help you get faster from a speed training perspective, there's other options out there that are actually going to do it, which that was probably one of the more surprising ones we've had recently. That definitely was kind of counterculture, I guess.
In that study, when you talk about the pressing power and vertical power, what are some of the things that you're doing? I know people are already wondering, like, okay, what are those exercises?
Yeah, for sure.
So what are kind of give us a picture of what that program may have looked like to some extent, just some different movements that you guys are doing.
Yeah, well, I think one of the important things for anyone who's here live or listening to this afterwards is to disseminate between power and strength, right? So strength is your ability to produce force. So then it doesn't necessarily matter how fast or how long it takes you to produce it, right? So if you're bench pressing, 100 pounds and it takes you 5 seconds to get it up versus if it takes you 1 second to get it up, you still created, the same amount of, force, your strength moved it. If you create that force over a shorter period of time, then all of a sudden there's more pets, then that creates power. So the more force you can create with less amount of time is power. So I think a lot of times strength and power kind of get used interchangeably and they're very different. But so what we look at power, I think the general test we use is a chest pass. The cool thing, we did a massive study, like 400 sample size of like 300 to 400. We looked at just distance of a basic 6-pound med ball compared to, we used a ballistic ball that has, you can measure velocity and peak speed and peak power. And we're like, that's cool. That's technology. That's totally going to be way more important. Right. And stick to your 6-pound med ball, everyone.
Much cheaper.
Much cheaper. And so I think the cool thing for us was like that just measuring the distance, it has a much more like mass adoption ability. So every golfer listening to this can actually do that test and see how they compare to other people their age. But, so basically tests to improve that. So if you think of it's a simple math equation. In order to create power, you need to be able to create force, which is strength. So any pushing exercises that will increase strength. So I know there's some people in the fitness industry that like golf fitness industry that are like, bench press is stupid. It's one of the best ways to increase upper body push power or push strength, right? So done correctly, whether it's dumbbells or barbells, whatever it is, that motion, getting that stronger so you can produce more force is certainly helpful. There's lots of different ways you can do it. And then obviously then there's a power element to it, which is then there's this like, how fast can you do it? So without getting too into the weeds, there's what are called force velocity profiles, where some people move lightweight really fast and some people move heavyweight really fast. We're doing a lot of work with all the top long drive guys in the world right now, testing and getting data on them. And one of the cool things is these guys have ball speeds of like 220 plus. We had one guy, he's 6'5", weighs 250. Like he's a freaking gorilla. Guy walks in. We had to like move our hitting station back because he's big and he's got the long drive driver, right? Like, so we had to like totally manipulate the whole setup to fit him on the force plates and everything. It was a good thing we got the really big force plates, but his 4 pounds. So we actually test with different weight balls now because we're actually mapping force velocity curves for golfers so we can more specifically help their training. So the lightest ball, like he was like maybe like average to below average, right? Like for like just regular golfers, like everybody on this call, like if you swing like 100 miles an hour or less, like he was literally average for people swinging that fast. But then you got him the really heavy ball and he threw it like 99, like off the charts, right? So like he was crazy good with heavy load, but he was terrible with light load.
Wow.
Right. So for him, we're going to work more on the speed factor. So that's where kind of understanding what kind of power you're good at or what kind of power you maybe need more help can actually help to really hone in the training even a little bit more. But to answer your question, get stronger in your ability in the upper body pushing. And then looking at, whether it's some people need to work with more lighter balls, moving them fast, or maybe cable machines like Kaiser machines are great because you can get actually power readings. You get objective feedback on how much power you created. So you can do things like that. Some people need more heavier. It really depends. It's going to be the same thing lower body. So squatting, deadlifting, any of those sorts of movements that help to get stronger in the lower body. Those are going to help your strength. And then the simplest form of power training is like jump type work, triple extension, whether if you got fake knees or hips or arthritis and you're not looking to jump, you can do things where you like a caveman throw where you throw the ball, kind of, swing it between your legs and throw it up in the air. Kettlebell swings are a good example too, but it's just, I think there's just an importance of having a goal with your training of, are you trying to get fast and work on like, how fast can I produce this force? Or are you looking at, I just need to create as much force as I possibly can, and I don't care how long it takes. And there's different ends of the spectrum for all of that, but that's where the testing is important. So hopefully that just delineates, really, to keep it simple, two things: either get stronger in one of those motions or get faster. Ideally train both. And then, kind of hopefully people can figure out exactly which one. If not, we can get more into that. But knowing which one to train from a power standpoint is important. For the general golfer, just do something fast and do something strong and you're probably going to be all right.
Well, that kind of leads into something that you guys pointed out very emphatically in your PDF that you had regarding the question of overspeed training or just speed training. Can you substitute overspeed training for regular strength and conditioning training? And I'll let you
please. Please no.
Yeah.
you know the answer that was coming out.
Yeah, obviously.
No, I think there's a lot of marketing that's done where like, hey, get stronger, create more power, like swinging a stick that weighs like 300 grams or if you're whatever speed device you're using, like that's not enough overload to create any sort of strength gains. And to improve your power, it maybe will help you go faster, but it's not going to change your force production ability, right? So I think that the thing there is we always look at is it's understanding you as the golfer. So everybody here on the call, that's here, anyone who's listening, like you may be really fast. We see this a lot with like single digit golfers, right? Well, in our database, like we can look and say, hey, you're like 80th or 90th percentile for a girl or guy your age in terms of how fast you're swinging. A lot of times we'll see, okay, yeah, but you're like 20th percentile for power outputs. So I always use the analogy. I just think of if everybody thinks of a pizza pie and there's 4 big slices to it, right? And we talk about speed. There's technique is one of them. You have the equipment is the second quarter. And then your third and fourth quarters are going to be your mobility, your ability, rotational mobility, more specifically hips, shoulders, T-spine, neck. Can you get from point A to point B? And then the final is your strength and power. So how basically, and so a lot of really good single digit golfers, or we'll see like, golfers that hit their 50s and they were like really good when they were younger. So their technique is great. They have the right equipment that's for them, and they'll actually be able to outswing, what you call like, basically out kick your coverage, where basically like they'll be able to create through efficiency and equipment all this speed, but their ability to actually support it, your strength and power is kind of like your armor. So it's almost like going into battle wearing a t-shirt and hoping you don't get shot. Like eventually at some point you're going to get nicked, right? And that's where the overuse injuries and those sorts of things come in. So that's where for like most golfers, it's generally in that profile. A lot of golfers, especially over 50, I see a lot of guys on here, like you guys typically stink at the rotational mobility side of things. I see a couple women, you guys tend to be pretty good on the mobility side, but the strength and power tends to be the bigger opportunity gain for you guys. But so that's, I think when we're looking at overspeed training, there's a time and a place, and where we see it's the most beneficial is if thinking of that kind of pizza pie, it's when somebody has good mobility. And then they also are within about 15 to 20 percentile points, club head speed and strength power metrics. If your strength or power metrics is more than 15 to 20 outside of that, then you have what we would call an injury window. I did another study. All of you who are just meeting me, I like to do studies. We talked to 85 golfers who'd been hurt doing overspeed training. And we actually screened all of them just through a basic rotational mobility, because I was curious, if there was a relationship. Every single one failed at least one rotary center. So not causation, just be clear. There was definitely a very strong correlation though between people who don't have the ability to rotate. And if you just think of common sense, if you can't rotate and then you just go faster, it's like, if you tap your head on a wall, like you're probably okay. But if you really try to whack it as hard as you can, probably going to have a concussion, right? And I think that's what we run into with overspeed training is we get a lot of golfers who don't have the requisite mobility. So they're just running really fast into brick walls, or they may have that mobility, but we maybe don't have the strengths. And then we're actually increasing our injury, our risk factor for getting hurt. But I think in the right person in the right place, I mean, overspeed training can be amazing. I've had some guys come in that massive strength power numbers. It's like, I had one guy, 6'7", 30s, like early 30s. He was swinging 101 miles an hour. He jumped over 40 inches. So for those of you, just to put context, that's like,
holy cow,
that's like head over the rim, right? He threw the ball like he was off the charts on all of them, but he's only swinging 101 miles an hour. Okay. He's hypermobile, so he has all the mobility. He's got a ton of power. He just doesn't know how to transfer it. So that's where sometimes you can use speed training or overspeed training. Within 15 minutes, he was swinging 125. And it's like, okay, now that makes more sense, right? But there was just an inability to translate the power to the golf swing. unfortunately, that's like less than 5% of the population listening, probably. But cool
Right.
for marketing that you'll see in many of those companies. But
Yeah. So in that case, so that's more the neurological thing where it's almost like he
correct.
just needed to kind of flip that switch on.
Mhm.
The body wasn't used to that, had all the prerequisites as far as the ability to move, the speed, the power. So that's why sometimes you'll see somebody that maybe you've seen them athletically do something else and you're like, oh yeah, this guy's he's gonna bomb it. And then he
Yeah.
goes out there and he's just kind of like dinking it down the
Yeah,
fairway.
exactly.
And so that would be a case where something like an overspeed training would really be
Could be
probably
it
a
could-
perfect fit.
Yeah, I mean, it could be like the magic bullet for that golfer. Unfortunately, that's not our majority.
So if you could, for those that are listening, both live here and in the future, give us a little idea of exactly just kind of what overspeed training is and some of the background research that you guys dug into when you were looking at it. Because obviously there's not a whole lot of research on the golf swing yet, but you looked into some other sports on it.
Yeah, so we did. So I actually wrote a big long review. I looked at all the different research that had been done across multiple sports: cricket, baseball. Trying to think. I want to say there was, might have been tennis. I don't know. There was like 5 or 6 different sports. So I looked at I pulled every single research study I could find. That was published, and some of them were probably marginal peer-reviewed journals. But basically pulled together everything. There was nothing that had really been done in golf. The problem with a lot of the research is like the biggest population was maybe 10 people that had been polled. They were all the same type of person, most of them, college age, because that's, most research is done at university. So what we basically did is we took, our beloved members, and we said, hey guys, we're going to test this. So we actually did 2 studies. We did an initial 6-week study. The other issue that when we did the study at the time, a lot of companies were doing lots and lots of reps. So like hundreds of reps, like 2 to 3 times a week, right? And now what's the number one problem golfers have is overuse injuries. And now we're going to add hundreds of additional max swings, right? So
max effort. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Which, I mean, you think of any other sport, like a 100-meter sprinter, they're not doing 100 meter sprints for their workouts. Like that's stupid, right? So we looked at actually taking, well, what if we took a light stick, a stick that's, just about maybe just a really light stick, one that's a little bit lighter than the driver, and then one's a little heavier. What if we only swing those and we only do that 30 times? And then we compared that to a control group who did, the light, the medium, and then the heavy stick, what was the standard at the time. And so basically we ran all that through. And what we found was if you just swung the light stick or you just swung the heavy stick, you got slower. And remind you, this is all our members. So their entire strength and conditioning routine was totally controlled. So this was the only variable. If you only swung the light stick, you got faster. And if you swung all 3 sticks, you got faster. But statistically speaking, there was no difference between just the one medium stick and then all 3 heavy sticks. So, we ran a I don't know if any of you are statisticians, but too detailed, all that sort of stuff. So anyway, I might have lost someone.
If you're listening in a car, high school and I didn't like it.
If you're listening in a car, wake back up. From there, then we went to because obviously, so basically, swinging a club a third of the amount of times in only one club was the same result as if you swung 300 times. So it was like, well, why are we going to do that many times, right? So that was in that study. I think we had somewhere between 20. So probably right around 20 subjects. So then we did a follow-up study, 8 weeks, just those 2, just the medium stick and then all 3, again, with the reduced protocol versus what was traditionally done at the time. And again, it came back where there was no statistical difference, light versus medium clubs. So we have shifted 100% to really, and I think this has been reinforced with a lot of the ground reaction force data that we've done on plates, like literally taking your driver and just swinging it as hard as you can is going to give you the same results as a lot of these other systems. We're in the midst of doing, actually, we haven't talked about this publicly, so this is brand new just released here. We are 12 weeks into, I think we're going to end up doing a 24-week study on non-dominant side training with we have obviously a very large sample size. So that's another hot topic that's kind of been coming out as well. If you swing non-dominantly, can you get faster? So that's another thing we're actually looking at as well in a controlled environment. There's a lot of the research that comes out. They don't have control groups. It's just like, hey, I took 10 people who've never swung really fast and had them swing non-dominantly, and oh my gosh, they got faster. Well, newsflash, if you have anybody do a specific movement really fast who's never done it before, guess what happens? You get faster. So I think that's where what we've really looked at is now being able to reduce the number of reps that a golfer needs to do. So literally you could do 30 swings twice a week is what they did in the protocols. You don't need to buy big fancy equipment. There's literally with your driver is going to be good for most people. There are some other systems out there where actually are looking at force velocity curves and you can change weights based on your speeds, and that's cool stuff. But just, the free version, take that driver you already got. And if you fit the profile for doing overspeed training, you don't need to do a ton, but you go hard, you go fast during those times, during, that 30 times, and you're good to go. And I think the cool thing to see is at the time it wasn't well received by, the people we were working with, but it's been cool to see that across the industry that all of a sudden, like, initial protocols have dropped to like 30 or 40 swings because, research was done. So that was kind of cool to see. Yeah. That's getting shared with a lot of golfers out there to really give them the best information. And so that's what overspeed is. You don't need to do a lot of it, but be intent, have a lot of intent as you're doing it, and in the right situation, it can be massively helpful to you in your game.
And I don't want to keep harping on overspeed, but I know a lot of people are really interested and have a lot of these questions. But another thing to mention that you guys make big note of is also the fact that you need to be able to give yourself time to rest in between some of those reps too.
Yeah. So that was this is always my favorite when I'll do like a live demo. We were doing the research, and I was doing a live demo, like an educational workshop, and somebody was like, well, I believe in overspeed training and this is what I do, and it's been amazing for me. And I was like, cool, you're going to come up, here's your 3 sticks, give them the 3 sticks. And I just said, who else wants to do it? And so they came up and I gave them 1 stick. And I said, all right, you're going to do your 100 swings. I said, you just get this 1 stick and you can swing it 10 times, 5 one way, 5 the other way, but then you have to wait 2 minutes before you go again. Right. So these two, the one guy who was giving me a hard time, he's all fired up. He's, let's go. I gained like so much in every session. So I was like, all right, go ahead, dude. So he starts swinging away, right? And he's like out of breath. He's sweating. The other guy's like literally does his 10 swings. He's like standing there and he's like, can I go yet? And I'm like, no, just wait. So he does his 30 swings, 2 minutes in between. So it takes him, it takes you about, 20 seconds to do your 10 swings, maybe 30 seconds. So let's call it 2.5 minutes each round. So he goes for 7.5 minutes, right? The other guy, he finished. The other guy's still going, right? He's sweating. So the guy like finally finishes. I'm like, you want a bottle of water, man? Give him water. And I was like, all right, just rest for like a couple minutes, get your breath back. So then they go both swing. And the guy who just did the like the 10, he gained, I think he picked up like 7 or 8 miles. And I got lucky. The guy that came out, he clearly had no neural training, right? So he was up like 7 or 8 miles an hour. The other guy was up like 3, right? And so then the guy was like, okay, he's not sweating. I like that idea, right? So,
right.
But yeah, so the reason for that rest, and this is an important part that I think often got missed, especially in the higher rep protocols, because it literally would take you like an hour to do 100 swings, is basically, if we think of the physiological system that's used in power training, is the glycolytic system, which basically like in 10 seconds, it's done. It's toast. Think of it like I don't know if anyone watched Fast and the Furious, you hit the NOS, right? And it like gives you the boost, but then it's gone, right? So you can create tons of power, tons of speed, but it's an energy system that exhausts really quickly. And you need to wait, minimum 5 to 1. So if you work for, 10 seconds, taking almost a minute off, or at minimum, ideally in some of the literature, you're like 20 to 30 times to 1. So the reason for the rest is to let that energy system reboot. And if you think of the golf, like if you're actually out playing, you're going to, swing hard on your drive, and then it's going to be 3 to 5 minutes. Sometimes for me, 7 to 8 while I'm looking in the woods for my ball before I hit my next shot. Right. It mimics how the game is actually played, but B, if we're being smart about the systems that we're training and we're trying to get maximal speed, well, it's silly to think that in mile 20, of a race, you're going to have as much energy and be as fresh as you were at mile 1 and be able to create as much power, unless you're like an elite marathoner. Right. So there was a lot of conflicting ideas and thoughts of our goal of this is to gain speed. So why are people out of breath? Is the old adage, if you're doing like plyometrics or speed or power training, is if you're out of breath, you didn't rest enough. right? And because you're not going to be able to exert maximal effort. So now you increase injury risk, you decrease effectiveness of the actual exercise, and you turn what's supposed to be an explosive, anaerobic glycolytic event into cardio, which is totally the opposite of where we want to go. So that's the importance of the rest. So good news, you don't need to sweat. You just work hard in a quick little bit of time, and then hang out for 2 minutes, watch the Golf Channel or something.
Yeah, I can't tell you how many times people have been like, yeah, that overspeed like that, man, that's a workout. I'm like, well, then
we clearly have a problem.
We need to rest. Yeah. Marina had a quick question here. Would you recommend 10 swings per day, 3 times a week, or what's kind of the general? I think you guys did 30 swings.
We did 30
twice a week, right?
So if you look at some of the research on like neuroplasticity, like 30 has just traditionally kind of been the number. That's where we stayed. Now, that's not to say we haven't tested. If you only did 10, would that be good? But my hunch would be you got to do more than 10. We've tested at 30, and I know that 30 works. But maybe that's a future study. That's a great question. Yeah. But my impression is that you're going to have to do a few more than just 10. And the key is, I think the important part, your frequency is correct, like 2 to 3 times a week, because you need that. I think this is something that also gets missed, is particularly in any of our type A high achievers that are on the listening here. They're like, oh, if 2 days is good, then 7 days is better. Right. Well, like the nervous system doesn't feel fatigued in the same way that, like, if you do a big squat workout, you're thinking of your trainer the next 2 days getting up and down off the toilet. Right. Like, it's not like it's going to create a soreness where you just feel it every step. It's a more, I would say, a behind the scenes or kind of sneaky fatigue that will build over time. We see it a lot of times in, our junior golfers are professionals as we get towards like August, September, later in the season. It's just this cumulative fatigue effect that starts to happen if you don't get rest and diet, and that goes down a whole nother rabbit hole. But that's the reason. So that the 2 to 3 times a week at most, and my educated guess, or as educated as I am, which isn't very, but would be probably like 30. I think 10 would probably be a little bit too little.
Yeah, I think it's important to point out the fact that that whole resting thing regarding the overspeed doesn't just go for overspeed. That goes for any kind of like plyometrics and things like that
100%.
too. We see a lot of people doing the jumping lunges and squats and stuff like that for like minute at a time, and it's like that's no longer, again, you're turning it into cardio, and very poor cardio, by the way.
Yeah, exactly.
You're highly increasing your risk of hurting something and then not being able to go out and play golf. So you're really kind of doing the exact opposite thing.
Well, and I think the important part, particularly like jumping, is I think a very concrete example. Your goal of it in like jump training, for an example, would be to go as high as you can. Now, if let's say you jump as high as you can, Jeff, I think your vertical is what, 38, 39. So like Jeff does
36 last time I measured. Yeah.
Sorry, I'll give you a couple extra. Well, so 30. So Jeff does his first jump, right? He gets to 36. By the time he gets to jump 20 or 30, he's no longer training his body to get to 36. He's maybe getting to 28 or 29, right? So now you're training your body to do less than what you maximally can do, which is, why would you do that, right? Like, it just doesn't make any sense. So that I think, so that's why the importance of resting is to allow that every time you do it, you're pushing your limit safely.
So would you do it on both sides still? The 30 swings per day?
Great question, right?
You got to wait to the end till the study comes out.
We're 12 weeks in. I need to know.
I would say that there's fewer non-dominant side swings being done these days in our building.
Wait for part 2.
Good teaser.
Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about, you mentioned some of your players towards the end of the season, noticing like these decreases in speed. Obviously that neural load kind of builds up throughout the season. Even now, there's different levels of players that we're talking to here on our podcast, from very high level to recreational to beginners. But kind of in general, can you give us some guidelines just for, what should people be doing during the season? That's a question that we get a lot. How do I change my programming, or what should I be doing during the season? Should I be doing overspeed? Should I be doing heavy lifting? Should I be doing, whatever? What guidelines could you give us there?
Yeah. So I think the first guideline, and if you hear nothing else in this episode, please just write this down, if you don't do anything, so the number of golfers that get to like April and they're like, okay, golf season, I'll see you in the fall. Okay. We've tested what happens to you if you're one of them listening. And what happens is by the time we get to October, November, you will lose 3 to 5% of what you had at the beginning of the season, on average. So if you're at 100 miles an hour, it's very common for somebody to come back, 95 to 97 miles an hour, not having done anything. We had a girl, she's on the LPGA tour now, but she was playing at a Pac-10 school. She left here swinging 97, 98 miles an hour after her senior year. She came back after first semester swinging 90 miles an hour. Like that's a massive drop for somebody. That's like 20 yards.
That's a career changer. Right
that goes from being tour eligible to, not even close, right? His average LPA is, 90, LPGA is going to be 96 to 100, somewhere in there. It's continuing to track up. So for the average golfer, like listening to this, like that's a big, that's literally a club to club and a half more typically that you're going to need towards the end of the year. So that's the first thing. So do something. That's better than nothing. But I think that the big shift that we see in season that is really, really helpful is the number one thing is we see is your level of activity and energy you're going to use goes up, generally speaking, on the golf course, because you're playing a lot more, right? So, I have a water bottle here. So if this is as much energy as I have, like if you drink, half of it's going to be gone for golf in season or maybe more, whereas in the off season, maybe you only drink a quarter of it. So you have less water or less energy left for the other stuff. So the key with our workouts is we want to get the best possible return on keeping your power output as high as possible and keeping your mobility as clean as possible with as little energy expenditure as possible. So I knew trying to do the least amount possible would help me one day when I was in school and my mom yelled at me and told me, why don't you try to get higher grades? I was like, well, it's good enough, Mom. Right. So that's literally like, this is my shout out to my mother for all golfers in season. You just need to do just enough. Right. And really what that is it's going to be thinking about how it's less volume. Volume is doing lots and lots of reps and lots of cardio. Those are the things that really drink and drain your water bottle or drain your energy out. So with our golfers in season, the number one way to keep your power outputs high and keep your fatigue levels low is you actually would go relative, whatever for you is heavier, right? So thinking like your 3 to 5 reps max, generally speaking, maybe only 3 sets, depending, obviously it's going to depend on your specific situation, but you're just trying to keep your max strength up as much as you can and trying to keep your speed up. So your power exercises, again, very, fast, hard intent, but you're probably not doing more than 5 reps many times. And that's it's to keep the nervous system primed, is to keep your ability, force production as high as possible. You don't need to be doing, if you're doing, 3 sets of 10, that's my favorite. Everyone, I do 3 sets of 10 or 3 sets of 15, or you're doing your rounds around the machines and you do your 15 reps and you go around twice. Like that's like the worst. Well, probably not the worst thing. The worst thing is probably doing nothing. But that's pretty close to worst, because you're actually going to fatigue yourself. And now you've left yourself with less energy and less water on the golf course when you go play. So I think that's the big shift, is the time to do lots of reps and build muscle mass. That's what builds muscle mass, by the way. You don't get bulky by doing sets of 5. That's the other, I don't want to get bulky. You don't get bulky by doing sets of 5, right? But if you did want to put on mass or increase your ability to produce force, you would do more repetitions and more volume in the off season when you're not using as much energy on the golf course. When we shift to in season, decrease our reps, keep our relative load, meaning if 100 pounds is your max, you're lifting probably 80 to 90 pounds. So 80 to 90, you're staying like 80+% of whatever your maxes are. Or the easier way to think about it is when you get to the 5th rep, you should not have more than 2 reps left in the tank. So it's a mind shift of what you do off season has to change in season. And when you do that, a lot of times we see, particularly in our amateur golfers, you actually get faster in season. So we'll get complaints sometimes of like, man, my 8-iron, I'm flying the green now. Now I got to hit a 9-iron. I'm like, well, isn't that what you wanted? They're like, yeah, you're right. I'll go to the range and just recalibrate.
Yeah, right.
Good.
Now, I mean, obviously, all of this depends on what the individual's ultimate goals are, right? So I know that some people are listening to this and they're like, well, I'm not a tour level golfer. I'm not a high level collegiate golfer. So take that for what it is, that, if your main goal in your workouts is not driving the ball further or even your golf game, some people, summertime, they're working out to look good at the pool, right? So like you have to figure out, and we talk about this all the time, is what's your intent for your performance? And that's going to dictate. But then there's also things that you can take out of this conversation that even if swing speed and your golf game is not the number one thing, what are ways that you can, again, do it the most efficient way. So you're not robbing your golf game while still, kind of hitting some of these other goals. Maybe somebody's goal is just simply weight loss and they want to, they got to burn the calories and things like that. So just thought that that's a point to bring up.
Definitely. Because I think sometimes people hear that and they're like, oh, no cardio ever. Well, like, if you have like a heart condition, it's good to go for walks, and maybe some cardio is not the worst thing for you. But it's just understanding that, or like a lot of people love the Peloton, or like, it's not saying you can't do those sort of like high intensity cardio type workouts. It's just a matter of make sure you balance them with the strength and power if distance in the game of golf is a priority for you. But couldn't have said it much better myself, Jeff. Just it totally depends on the priorities and just making sure you're balancing everything you want to do in life. Longevity is by far the number one thing that we talk to golfers. They just want to play till their 70s, 80s, and beyond. And so it's a matter of balancing health and wellness with performance.
You mentioned earlier that you guys have some prerequisites for the mobility, stability kind of stuff that you look at. Can you explain those a little bit so people have a better idea of visually what that actually is, and they can almost kind of test themselves to some extent? I think do you guys still have the assessment that you had on your
we do, website? Yeah. Anyway, anyone go to our website, it's free. They can download it. It's parforsuccess.com. But basically the cool thing about the assessment, through all the research we've done, is we've really kind of dialed it down mobility wise. The only things that really matter are your hip internal rotation, which other than Jeff, nobody probably knows what that is. But think of you're rotating into your trail leg. That's internal rotation into your trail leg, and then kind of getting through to your lead side. That's internal rotation in your lead side. So other than that, shoulder, what's called external rotation, which any of you guys watching, you can see it's going back this way. So think of like when you drop the club into the slot to kind of shallow it out. That is extremely important. Thoracic rotation and neck rotation. Those are the big four. Like if you don't have full mobility in those areas, then A, they can be fixed in like 6 weeks pretty quickly, but B, that's going to hold you back. If we look at our continuum of, I don't really care about strength and power until that's really cleaned up. Doesn't mean we can't work on it at the same time, but that's going to be kind of the low hanging fruit we want to address first. So we're not running really fast into brick walls. But so those are kind of the big four. Obviously, flexion, can you touch your toes? Can you extend backwards? Those sorts of things too. But beyond that, there's really, unless like we're looking like at our top 3 long drive guys in the world and they're trying to crack 230 ball speeds, like then we're looking at like the 1%. But beyond that, we're not really going anywhere else other than those main general areas. Obviously, if you get a general fitness and you're trying to squat and your ankle mobility stinks, well, then that's clearly important. But in terms of just talking about golf performance and the ability to swing the golf club, those are the big 4. They're on our website, totally free. Take them, see if you stink or not. 75% of guys over 50 will fail at least 1. 50%, or actually a little over 50%, will fail at least 2. So it's a very high probability that you probably have an issue. But the good news is super easy fix. And and then from there, then you can start to think about the power stuff and all the kind of the more fun stuff that we talk about and that you see on Instagram.
Awesome. And guys, we've still got about a little over 10 minutes or so, and I've got a couple more questions, but want to give you guys a chance, if you are on the call live, if you have a question for Chris, pop it in so we can throw it out to him. I want to talk a little bit about the periodization that you guys have found to work really well for your golfers, and in conjunction to kind of traditional periodization. Periodization, guys, being kind of like structuring different goals for your workouts throughout the year, and then as you get closer to your golf season, kind of building up to your season, then obviously in season. But you guys have found that there's something that works a little bit better than classic traditional strength and conditioning.
Yeah, you really did dive into the research. Nice.
I'm telling you, man, I do my homework.
Yeah, no. So there's a type of training that's called triphasic training that I guess we got into this probably back in 2016.
We did talk about this a little bit on the last time you were on the show. I do.
Probably did. Yeah. So So we may have new, actually, we can talk about some of the new stuff we've done with it too. But basically, kind of long story short, what it is, if you think of a squat, that's the easiest motion for people to think of. On your way down, that would be called the eccentric phase of movement. So it's kind of a controlled lengthening of the muscles lowering down. Then there's going to be kind of an initial pause. That's called the isometric before you then explode up, and that's called concentric. So there's kind of three distinct phases of a movement. You think of golf swing, you kind of take it back, you kind of lengthen everything. And there's especially depending on the player, Matsuyama has a nice pause. And then, then you come down, and explode all the way through. So there's definitely some similarities there. So what we looked at was, if we trained a golfer where basically you have, a certain number of weeks where you just focus on the lowering phase, you like overemphasize that. So think of super slow on the way down. And then you can kind of go up normal speed. And the next phase you do where you go down normal speed, but then you hold it at the bottom, or whatever the isometric, but before you'd explode up. And then the final phase of the program would be, then you'd focus solely kind of normal down, but then totally working on explosion and speed on the way up. So what we did is we ran this, actually over 2 years we did this. We did traditional training, which is what we were more so talking about, where you generally start higher reps, lower weight, and then as you get stronger, you do less reps, more weight, and you just generally get stronger. So we did it with kids and we did it with adults. And what we found is, if we looked at the average swing speed gain over a course of 12 weeks, what we saw was that if adults did traditional training compared to the average, they actually underperformed that average by about 40%. If they did triphasic training, they actually outperformed that swing speed average by like 60%. And then it was really cool, and left us scratching our heads as well a little bit too for a while. The kids were reversed. So they actually did terrible with triphasic. They were underperforming, but they did better with traditional training. So basically what we kind of theorized at the end is that, well, the kids were a lot less physically developed. They had less muscle mass. And so traditional training actually was a better way for them to learn the movements, groove them, and actually build muscle mass because they got more reps. And for the adults, generally, there's going to be a little bit more training history, a little bit more muscle base that's already there. And the triphasic training helped them. And then also by having that focus on the explosion, like we call it the conversion to power phase, there's a little bit neuro benefit as well there too. Cool thing for the adults too is because you're under, it's like a squat, you're going down for like 6-7 seconds and then up. You don't need as much weight either. So it's actually, you use less load, which is, most adults don't mind from that perspective as well too. So that was kind of the finding, is that using that for adults actually outperformed just traditional training. And then we got into flywheel training and testing that for rotational work. And we actually saw that using a flywheel, which, does anyone here know what a flywheel is?
Big show off, Jeff.
So think of it as, it was initially like invented for like astronauts in space. So basically, like the harder you pull it, it pulls you back even harder. So it creates an overload. They use it in space because there's no gravity, obviously. So it was a way, basically, the harder you pull, it pulls back, and then you have to like fight it and then change the direction. So it's a way that you actually get what's called an eccentric overload. So if you think of triphasic training, that eccentric phase, it basically emphasizes that. So we actually use that in rotational training. We did another study on that. The more I say we did a study, I'm such a geek. But basically what we saw with that was that built off of the findings we saw with the triphasic stuff. Is with that, then we saw in that 12-week average, what we would see normal gains in half the time using eccentric flywheel training rotationally. Remember, we started today talking how like med balls don't really help speed rotationally, but using this compared to bands and regular cables, we saw, compared to the normal, normally we'd see about 1 mile an hour across an entire database of 12 weeks. We saw 2.5 miles an hour in 6 weeks. So it was 150% increase compared to the average that we'd expect to see in half the time. So it was like, holy smokes. So now everybody here does that. But it was an incredible kind of evolution of where the initial research then took us to how can we get stronger rotationally in a way that actually matters. And that was cool. It came at a cool time too, because that was right after we got to the point where we were doing, we had the database got to, over 2,000 or so. So it was a sample size where we could actually look at meaningful numbers. We'd been testing anti-rotational strength. And we were, that actually has nothing to do with club head speed at all. So that's like one of the worst correlations. We were like, oh man, so the core doesn't matter. And then we did that testing. We're like, okay, well, if used correctly, it does matter. So it was kind of a cool for, fitness guys who've been doing like core strength. And you're like, oh no, I've been wrong for a decade. And then you do that and it's like, okay, well, this actually does work. Okay, cool. So that was pretty cool to kind of see the evolution of what we saw really kind of would give golfers those extra gains, getting more for doing less, as my mother's not proud of me for doing generally in school. But.
So let's talk about core strength a little bit, because if you're finding that obviously the rotational stuff with the flywheel, that definitely helped, but traditional kind of anti-rotational drills, rotational things with the cables, the bands, weren't necessarily correlating to higher speeds. So how do you guys employ core strength? What benefits does it still have for the golfers? And because sure. I don't want people to hear like, oh, core strength, that
forget don't
that.
help. Yeah, I'm glad you're clarifying here. Yeah, so I think one of the biggest types of core strengthening that we work on a lot is anti-extension. So think of like dead bugs or things that prevent your back from arching, right? Going into the forward pelvic tilt where then your back gets locked up. So I think that's incredibly important for maintaining spinal alignment and those sorts of things. But if you think about the type of core strength, and I think if we think of the core, I always think about what's the function of the core. Well, the function of the core is to transfer energy from bottom to top. We're thinking golf swing. This is what we've seen with all our ground reaction force training, and the research we're doing is even kinematics don't really matter. Like those are a result of kinetics and how you use the ground. So if somebody uses the ground correctly, they have the right motion in their hips, they have that flexibility, and they have the ability to transfer up, the kinematics just happen. Like you don't have to train them, right? Those actually are kind of like a result of everything that's happening before. So when we look at core strength, doing rotational stuff or anti-rotational stuff, it didn't really move the needle. And we had a big database that we were very surprised by it. But when we look at, for us, core strengthening, it's, can you control your pelvis? So like a dead bug or not going into arching positions. But if you're deadlifting, because then you get to the other side of things, right? You're doing the strength training. We know that force production is important. So you're going to be deadlifting, you're going to be squatting, you're going to be lunging with a goblet, and with heavier loads, doing less reps. Well, like, if you put 200 pounds on your back, like you got to have a pretty strong core. And I'm pretty sure you're gonna have to work a lot harder to stabilize that than a band, right? And so I think that's where what we really saw was, if we do that stuff, and we theorize, let's say, hey, that's core strengthening. And we just said, well, let's test it against all this other stuff that everyone else is saying that we thought works. And then it didn't work. It didn't pan out. And I think the more research we've done, the more we get to, hey, we know just the basics of, squat, hinge, push, pull, rotate now with eccentric overload. We know those work. Those are our baseline. And then we just test everything else against it. And we say, hey, if it's so good, let's see if it beats what the simple stuff that we know. That's like what we did with the ballistic ball. Like, this is really cool and fancy. Does it beat the basic 6-pound ball? No. Okay, get rid of it. Right. And so that's where it's always just looking at the basic kind of gold standards and saying, okay, well, we have the most open mind. We try to poke as many holes in our stuff as we possibly can. And it's like, all right, cool. That looks like a cool idea. Let's test it. Like, that theoretically makes sense. Let's see if it beats the old boring stuff. And it's kind of like a little bit of a downer for us. It's like the old stuff just keeps winning. And it's really hard to find stuff. We tested velocity-based training. Like, the old stuff just continues to win, which for everybody listening is good news. It's because you can keep it, like I would say, keep it stupid simple, right? And just do the basics and understand what your body needs. Adjust your training in season versus off season, and the ability to play golf well into your 70s and 80s is really very doable. We're tracking one guy. He's 78 years old. He's been with us since he's 70, and he picks up a half mile, like it's like clockwork, half mile an hour every year. Right. And the average guy who's not doing anything working out is going to lose, 5 to 10 mile, basically almost like a mile an hour every single year. So net over 8 years, he's up 4 miles an hour, and everybody else has lost 8. He's net 12 miles an hour better than his peers. And then I think the cool part, I say all that to say, like, everybody listening, like you can do it. It's not incredibly difficult. There's lots of good resources. This is one of my favorite, 18 Strong, of just getting good information, of just go out there, do the stupid, simple stuff, and just really kind of test and retest your body and ask yourself the question of, approach life with a healthy skepticism of, that looks cool. Let's test it and test where you start, implement something. And at the end, did it get better or not? And if it didn't, then go back to whatever you were doing, because whatever you just started doing didn't help you.
We have one question that just popped in from Randy. He said, you mentioned med balls and plyometrics. Are you familiar with Dr. Don Chu by any chance?
I am not, actually.
Gotcha. Okay. I wanted to just kind of wrap one thing up, because we got about a minute here to finish up. So just to be really crystal clear and kind of tie everything back together, let's talk to the folks that they don't have overspeed training. They don't have any of the fancy stuff. We said that, a lot of the old school stuff is the best way to go. We talked about how, for most people, getting stronger is obviously going to be
Beneficial.
just a must. What are the couple simplest things that they can then add into their strength training program? Maybe some specifics on just building up a little bit of that speed and power. Just a couple things for them to take away with them.
Yeah, for sure. So to keep it simple, I would say kind of three main areas. The first is make sure you can rotate, right? So of the three, number one would be make sure you can rotate into your hips, rotate your shoulders, spine, and neck, right? That's the big four that you got to be able to do. Number two would be your ability to produce lower body power. So that would be any form of squatting or lunging or hinging, like a deadlift or kettlebell work. I mean, there are obviously tons of variations that you can add in there, but some form of strength work for your lower body in the form of squatting and hinging. And, generally, no more than 8 reps. When you get to that eighth rep, make sure you don't have more than 2 in the tank. If you do have more than 2 in the tank, add weight. In season, drop it down to, more than 5 reps in a set. If you have more than 2 reps left in the tank, add more weight. You didn't create an overload effect. And then then I think the last or the third would be then upper body. So it's your upper body push power. So anything pressing, there's really no benefit of doing a lot of pressing overhead that we have seen performance wise, adds undue risk, in my opinion, to the shoulder girdle, particularly if you're over 50 or just work at a desk in general. Unless you're trying to be an Olympic lifter and compete snatching, there's really no need to go overhead for a golfer. So any sort of like chest pressing, bench pressing, cable presses, whatever it may be, med ball, press, explosive med ball work. And same thing, same rules apply. If you're trying to increase your strength off season, no more than 8 reps. Unless you're trying to build mass, then certainly you can do more. But generally, I always try to have kind of 2 left in the tank just to keep it simple. And then in season, no more than 5 reps. Again, just two or fewer left in the tank with good form. And I think those are kind of the big 3 areas that from the research. Make sure you can rotate, make sure you can produce lower body vertical power, and make sure you can produce upper body push power. You do those 3 things, you'll be better than most when it comes to playing this game for a long time.
I love it, man. This was awesome. So much good information. And like I said, we're going to link up all the stuff that you guys sent over with your research and
all the research is free for everybody. You guys download it, read through it. If stuff doesn't make any sense, just shoot us an email. We'll jump on a call with you. Not a problem at all.
Yeah. And I highly recommend, especially the one review that you guys did, because you laid out so many of these things and it'll help you to read through it again. Now that you've heard Chris explain it and go into the details of it, to read through it again will make a lot of sense. So we'll have that all linked up in the show notes. Chris, so much fun getting you back on the show. We're definitely gonna do this again when you get some of those new studies coming out, and can't thank you enough for coming on, bud.
Yeah, man, my pleasure. Should we swing opposite sides?
Oh, yeah.
I don't know.
Can't wait.
To be continued.
We'll think on that.
Awesome.
All right, guys, enjoyed it.
All right, guys. Thank you so
Thanks,
much
Chris.
for joining us this week. We'll catch up next time. Stay strong.